Thanks, Sue. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second session in our webinar series on interdisciplinary teaching and learning. So in October, we had our first webinar with Dr. Vivian Garcia de Stefani and Dr. Andre Correa, and they shared with us their interdisciplinary project that's taking place at their institution in Brazil. And they also shared with us the theoretical framework within which they built this interdisciplinary project based on Paulo Freire's and Elton Krenek's philosophies. And we found it really inspiring and useful to see what it looks like when such a big pedagogical project is built on top of a strong theoretical framework. It was a really important reminder that if we're going to successfully design and implement our own interdisciplinary projects, we have to first understand why we're doing it and what it means to be interdisciplinary. So today's experts, joining us from both sides of the country, are here to help us think about these topics. So I've just popped up a brief overview slide of what we can expect today. So our first speaker today is Dr. James Charbonneau from the University of British Columbia. James is an associate professor of teaching in the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Associate Dean of Students for the Faculty of Science at UBC. In his own words, he spends most of his time thinking about how to best support instructors and students to make teaching and learning better. So as you see on the overview slide, today James is going to help us define the term interdisciplinary so that we can better understand our own goals in moving forward towards an interdisciplinary approach and to start building our own theoretical frameworks. Our second speaker is Dr. Firas Moosvi. Firas, you can give it a wave. Also from UBC. Firas is a lecturer in the computer science department, and his interests include innovative learning tech in large classes, alternative grading systems, and the use of learning analytics. Today, Firas is going to be sharing with us a long-running interdisciplinary science program for first-year students at UBC called Science One. And as you'll see, I am myself an alumni of the program. And I can attest to the innovative nature of the program. And I think we're going to learn a lot from the challenges and successes that Firas will share with us. And our third speaker, Dr. Gregor Kos. Greg, are you there to give a wave? It's okay, you'll see him soon. Teaches analytical chemistry, thermodynamics, and advanced statistical modeling. His teaching interests are focused on student participation, peer learning, and two-stage assessments. As one of the faculty responsible for the first-year science experience at Concordia, Gregor will share with us his experience teaching an experiential, learning-based integrated science seminar. So as you listen to today's speakers, please feel free to ask questions by typing in the chat. We're going to save questions directed directly at the speakers to the end of each of their sections. But feel free to type questions in the chat whenever, and we can, all the speakers and other people can contribute to those conversations on the side. And I'll make sure that any questions that don't get addressed get brought up in the appropriate time. Plus, we have a large time designated for discussion at the end as well. And as Sue mentioned, we have a survey. It's 2 minutes to fill out, and it helps us continue to offer you events that actually suit your interests and your needs. So she's going to post the link in the chat as we get going in case you have to leave early. We would really appreciate it if you take the time to fill that out. So with that, I am handing you over to James.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you. This is a pleasure to be back here giving a talk for this group. What I'll introduce is the theoretical framework that I've used for a bunch of my research in interdisciplinarity. Thinking about interdisciplinarity, mostly focused on a program called Science One, which Firas will introduce later. But really thinking about sort of two ways. How do we categorize the way things are built, sort of intentionally or unintentionally? And how do we measure whether or not what we've built has achieved our goals? So with that in mind, just to sort of put, when we talk about interdisciplinarity, to put it on a spectrum or a continuum, I think it's helpful to look at this this graph. So this was something that was presented by Jillian Gerhardt in her PhD thesis at UBC, built on the work of Drake, and there was another person as well. But it's really talking about the how when we're delivering content, how do we actually categorize it? And so to give an idea, so when we talk about multidisciplinary, a spectrum into interdisciplinary, a spectrum into what we call transdisciplinarity, we think about it, how much overlap of maybe the disciplines there are. And if we were to map this onto, say, a first-year teaching experience, multidisciplinarity is what we see with most first-year programs, right? You come into a university, you take a course in math, a course in physics, a course in chemistry, a course in biology, a course in maybe earth and ocean science or something like that. This is similar to, I think, every experience. So, you know, if you're not in science, you're coming into an arts discipline, you're taking this a survey of all of the sort of subjects that are introduced, but they're all very separate. And you know, you might know what is being taught in one of the other courses, but the courses really exist in these silos. When we move further, we think of a program in which there's intentional overlap. So this is where a program like Science One, as Firas will discuss later, might exist, where there's intentionality in the design of the course, where the chemistry taught and the physics taught is taught by the same professors in the same classroom. And you're trying to build these connections while also maintaining the identity of the discipline, right? The person teaching it is a physicist or a chemist. And then moving completely into this spectrum, the end is maybe this transdisciplinarity. I'm not sure where this might exist actually in education. I think of like an architecture school or something like that, where imagine you are trying to design a playground in totality in a neighborhood. There's all kinds of things that go into that. There's the sort of sociology of how kids play and what they play with. There's the actual like building the structure. There's all of the aspects of how this fits into a community. There's all of the aspects of how do you get the electrical and the water and everything to all support this playground. And those disciplines aren't really split up. You're designing a playground, right? So that's sort of the sort of extreme end. So this is how we think about sort of categorizing, either looking at things that are already built and trying to fit them in, or when you're thinking of building something, okay, how am I gonna be intentional about the overlap? The next thing that we sort of framed a lot of our work on, and the way I think about particularly programs like Science One. I should say I was the director of Science One. I taught in Science One for 10 years, so I'm very invested in the program. This research by Paxson talked about the levels of interaction between disciplines, mostly in terms of scientific advancement. And so he was looking at interactions where you're working on a project and two groups come together and contribute knowledge to that project, and what is the result of that. And so he made these levels, which were then used by Gouveia and all later in this paper, A Framework for Analyzing Interdisciplinary Tasks, which is a very great paper. I really encourage you to go look at it. But Paxson's levels were essentially, the first one was taking notice of the materials in one discipline useful to the other, such that the notice-taking discipline is not modified. So this is like two people working on a project, or two groups working on a project, and they both contribute, but neither is changed by that contribution. And the example that Paxson gives, one of them, is, well, the physicists invented the word processor, and art historians use that to write. It's a very surface level thing. Neither discipline is particularly changed or influenced by it. It's a tool that is used. The second level is the modification of one discipline as a result of the contact with the other. And so the example that Paxson uses for this is the Manhattan Project, right? This was a huge project that brought together a bunch of sciences. It advanced chemistry and physics an immense amount. Each of those disciplines moved leaps and bounds. The third level is building of an interface between the disciplines. So this would be when two disciplines come together and create a third discipline, right? Biophysics. So biology and physics come together. So there's sufficient overlap that we're just going to offer this new discipline, and there are going to be practitioners in this new discipline. And the fourth level is really a step where these disciplines that have been interacting with each other start to become sort of indistinguishable from each other. And so one of the examples that Paxson gives is the absorption of astronomy into physics. I would also say the absorption of physics into astronomy, maybe, to make it a both-way thing. I'm also trained as an astrophysicist. That was my PhD. But another one was the linking of chemistry and physics through thermodynamics. This subject that is a subject on its own, thermodynamics, that both physics and chemists use, and was a monumental undertaking and a monumental achievement in those two. So just to, I guess, quickly go through how we think of this in an education context, is we were looking at how to map the same kind of levels of interaction, but to what students were experiencing in class. Like when we're teaching students in a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary setting, what level of interaction are they getting to when we're presenting material to them? And so level one, to sort of map these onto Paxson's framework, is a very simple observations, like taking notice of materials and concepts. Waves in physics are like sine waves in math, stuff like that. The ideal gas law, the first law of thermodynamics, were previously introduced in physics. We see them in chemistry. What's interesting was a monumental undertaking in developing thermodynamics as an underpinning for both physics and chemistry is a surface level observation for a student, because we call them both thermodynamics in the textbook, right? Level two, we would talk about these lean interdisciplinary connections with no clear implication or recognition of the other disciplines' relationship to each other. So this is that, they realize that there is some connection here between the Schrödinger equation in chemistry and physics. Are they the same thing? It's not entirely clear to this student in this example. Like the particles and energy are slightly different. I should say particles and energy are not different in the two subjects. But this is where the student is getting at in the introduction of these things. Level three would be a rich and explicit connection with clear explanations that demonstrate how one concept in a discipline translates to another discipline. So in math, we learned how to analyze differential equations. This expands biology as we use differential equations and their solutions to model population growth. It's a very rich connection between the two. And then the fourth one is the exploration of the connection in a very deep way, and possibly a relationship to a third discipline that wasn't really introduced in this topic. So here's this, not the same person, but another student talking about differential equations and how they're used. They talk about the Euler's method, and then they go out of their way and they say, oh, well, but the Euler method was used in this program, in the programming that we did. And we can, it's the emergence of this realizing that these two things introduced were actually part of this third thing in a very rich connection. So that's all I have, but I hope it gives this overview of the two sort of ways of thinking about interdisciplinary. First, of how we might categorize or how we might intentionally design something on the spectrum of multidisciplinarity to transdisciplinarity. And then how we might measure the interactions between students or the understanding that students get when we're introducing these topics in these things. Because we might design something that's transdisciplinary, but if a student isn't making those transdisciplinary connections, maybe we need to work on that design some more. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you, James. That was actually very useful. I have your slides and I was still taking screenshots of your slides, and I actually have the slides, plus making notes to refer some of your slides to some of my colleagues. So that's really useful. Does anyone have any questions that haven't been addressed in the chat yet? Now's a chance to ask. I'll give it a few minutes, but if not, we're going to consider it food for thought and then see how it connects to the examples. I'm not seeing any hands, and there's been chat, but not specific questions, mostly just compliments. So we'll move on to Firas' part of the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Phoebe, for the introduction. So my name is Firas, as Phoebe originally said, and the title of this talk was going to be a love letter, but then I decided this is a formal setting where people are really serious and rigorous, and so instead it's a critical reflection of challenges and opportunities of interdisciplinary education at UBC. And so I'll, as James alluded to, we'll talk about the Science 1 program. But I wanted to quickly acknowledge that this program, this university, and all of us today who are at UBC are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Musqueam peoples. And some of this will come up in some of the slides I'll show you. So I just wanted to make that land acknowledgement. So Science 1 is a small, challenging, integrated first-year science experience at the University of British Columbia. That's essentially from their website. This is how it's advertised and marketed to students. It's small, it's challenging, and it's integrated. And I think showing the space of where the students are is a great starting point. There's this giant pillar, which I was told when they were moving into that space was an extreme challenge because it made teaching there very difficult. And of course, Science 1 students embraced the challenge, and there were some students who decided to create murals out of it. And this is 4, but it's just one from different sides. And you can see that, you know, the Science 1 students are also very artistic, creative, and the space itself is very collaborative, right? People are working on the board. This is the same room that they learn in. This is where the lectures happen, where the labs, except for the labs that require equipment, this is where some of the workshops and tutorials all happen. And so this is kind of the heart of Science 1. It's a collaborative space where people can work on different problems together across disciplines when they enter first year. Okay. So a little bit about me. Again, this seems out of order, but it's all related because I did Science 1 myself 10 years ago. And when I did this program in 2004, 2005 is when I finished. I ended up getting a degree in biophysics, right? And when I first entered university, that I didn't even know that was a thing. But I entered the Science 1 program because, again, it was advertised as this challenging thing that combined disciplines together, and that was interesting to me, although I was naive first year, had no idea what it meant. And throughout the program, we saw examples of how different disciplines can kind of integrate, and at the intersection of those is where the interesting and cool problems are. And I still remember to this day, Dr. Alex McKay, who's a renowned MRI physicist, magnetic resonance imaging, came and did a talk about, hey, if you're interested in physics and biology at the intersection of medicine, this is a program for you. And he kind of talked about how, you know, MRIs and brain imaging and cancer imaging is this field where you can combine all these things together. And that's what I ended up doing for my bachelor's, my master's. Ended up getting a PhD in physics, and now I teach in the computer science department, right? Again, my whole life has been interdisciplinary, and I wouldn't say it's all because of Science 1, but it really is all because of Science 1, because that's where I got my first introduction to interdisciplinarity, and I also did some research with James on trying to understand how students think about interdisciplinarity. Okay, so about the program, lots about so far, we've heard a lot about it, but not very much about what it is. It's a cohort-based first-year program with roughly 80 students, and that's meant to be interdisciplinary both academically and socially. So because it's academically interdisciplinary, Essentially, it's a giant course, 28 credits, which corresponds to roughly 9 1/3 courses altogether with labs. It makes 9 1/3. That combines the four, and this is again up for debate and discussion, the four sciences, which is not inclusive at all, but that's just how our university works in terms of disciplines. We have biology, chemistry, math, and physics, and everything just gets taught in a unified and integrated format. What that means is that instructors from other disciplines that are part of the Science 1 program sit in the room and chime in. So when we're talking about hydrogen bonds and covalent bonds in chemistry, the biology instructor might chime in and say, hey, you remember that lecture we had on RNA and DNA. This is what those bonds are. This is how much energy you need. And the physicist might say, this is how much energy you need to break those bonds. And so it all feels very integrated and very cohesive. Of course, moments like that are rare. As we all know, teaching, when you're doing a whole bunch of content, it's very rare that the stars align, that all 3 or 4 of these disciplines will be able to say something at the same time. That said, there is a lot of work that the instructors do to try and make sure those moments actually happen. And even if it's not right at that time, it could be like last week or 2 weeks ago, you learned about differential equations. We're going to use that in biology to solve this problem. And so it's not just all simultaneous, it's also kind of staggered a little bit. There's different experiences that students are promised, and they kind of get those. At the end of the year, students get 1 grade. So all of these courses combined together for one line on their transcript. Well, it's 1 line in the grade column, but there's a whole note that says, Science 1 and interdisciplinary program, blah, blah, blah. These are all the courses, just for transparency to other institutions. Everyone at UBC seems to know about Science 1, but of course, when you're transferring or going to grad school, your transcripts get evaluated. And so that note is important. Okay, so who is the ideal candidate for the Science 1 program? From the website, they say, it's ideal for students who have a passion for science and for learning. And this part again speaks to my alternative grading philosophy. Grades aren't everything, that's what they say up front. And so this is again an interesting way to defer grades until the very end of the 2nd semester of 1st year, right? I mean, you still get one, but it's much later. We want the kind of people who are curious about things, who ask the right questions and aren't satisfied until they fully understand the answer, and those who dream big, right? So that's kind of a higher level explanation of the type of students that Science 1 is intended for. And later on in the frequently asked questions, there's this post that says, I've heard that Science 1 is really hard and I'm worried about my grades. So it says Science 1 can be difficult, but so is the transition from high school to university. And then speaking directly with the spotlight on to med students or future pre-med students, we've spoken directly to UBC medical school admissions, and they've said, there's no way taking Science 1 can hurt your chances of getting into med school. Right off the bat, that concern is addressed. And of course, people worry about grades a lot, and usually it's the pre-med students who have a bigger concern competing against students that are potentially taking other courses for an easier route to get to medicine. And so again, these are some of the concerns that students have that are kind of addressed up front in the program. In 2012, there was a study done. This program is quite old. I actually don't even remember the first year it was out, but they did a comprehensive analysis to see if Science 1 actually adds any value to students' degree programs, to their career choices and things like that. And they found that, Dryden et al. Found that there's a clear signal that there's a large benefit to participating in Science 1, and conclude that this arises from a combination of the recruitment of enthusiastic students. So certainly self-selection is an important component of this. Students who want to be in Science 1 tend to be the more high-performing ones that are kind of have an aptitude in multiple sciences, who are up for a challenge. And so we also challenge those specific students. The Science 1 admissions process and taking the program itself, all those are important components of students being successful. So this analysis that I've linked it in the reference, but it goes into detail about how students who take Science 1 do in future terms and future courses compared to students from other more standard programs. Okay, so again, a couple of UBC isms. At the University of British Columbia, at least in the Faculty of Science, which is what I know, students choose their major after their first year. So the idea is that students couldn't really choose what they wanted to do right after high school. So we let them take a full year, and then after they can decide what major they want to specialize into. The interesting thing is Science 1 meets the prerequisite for almost every science specialization. And the word almost here makes me curious, and I kind of do want to dig in to see what the almost is restricting. But it's probably one course that you could take and then be eligible. So just by itself, it meets the prerequisite for almost every science specialization, right? And there are other first-year interdisciplinary programs on campus outside of Science 1. And I kind of just want to mention those. Land 1 is the most recent one. It's an integrated course for first-year students in forestry or land and food systems. And then I think Arts 1 predated Science 1. It's a program that was launched in 1967, and it's been around for 50 years. Arts 1 and Science 1 happen to share the same floor or the same building. And so they also, they're kind of neighbors, these two programs. And so these are other kind of interdisciplinary programs. There's other ones as well, but these are the ones where they have this integrated multidisciplinary approach. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the social component of this. Just, I know we don't have a lot of time, but the one thing I want to say about the social component is having those 80 students together for the whole year, going on at least 2 field trips, as well as doing projects and labs and homework assignments together, builds a very nice, gives students who are coming into first year a very nice way to socialize and be with people who they're kind of aligned with, right? And I still have my friends group from Science 1 back in the day, and many of those people found each other and are life partners, and that's where they met. And Science 1 couples, we call them. So it's kind of all, it's also a social experience, okay? And it tends to be that Science 1 students, even after they graduate, somehow find each other. And 2 examples I'll give. One is that now I'm teaching in the Department of Computer Science, and this grad student comes up to me and says, "Hey, I want to work on you on this project, and these are my interests." And I was like, that's very interdisciplinary. How did you find me? And he's like, "Oh, I was just looking for people who were doing data science and computer science, and I thought it would be interesting." We kind of got to talking, and it turned out that student had also done Science 1, right? And then I also have another example here, someone in this room, Phoebe, who we just found out is also a Science 1 alumni. So we always somehow find each other. There's actually not that many of us, 80 students out of thousands of first years, and somehow in our programs, various life things, we're on completely opposite parts of the country, but we do always find a way to gravitate towards each other because of our interest in this interdisciplinarity. So let me give you some of the examples that I remember from back in the day. So here's the first one. Estimate the number of protons in a cell. Okay, classic interdisciplinary question. It's a Fermi problem where you have to make some assumptions and then justify them. The interesting, nice, scary thing was that this is from my year, 2004, 2005, and it was on a physics final exam. So, it was one question out of a bunch. I opened that and I was like, oh, right now I hate this, but I also really love it because it's exactly the type of question that I would have thought to be asked in a program like Science 1, because it combines my knowledge of biology, how big is a cell, what's the radius of it, and actually it ended up being not that difficult of a question once you kind of thought about it and got over the initial hump of, hey, how am I supposed to even answer this? And so essentially you kind of figure out how many protons you can pack into a sphere of this size, and then you kind of scale down from there because other stuff has to be there as well. And anyway, they don't really care about the final answer. It's just about the right magnitude and what assumptions you made. So this is a classic Science 1 exam question that could be asked. I asked ChatGPT, since that's in the, I probably wasted at least 10 or 12 water bottles with this answer. in terms of energy used, but the diffusion time of oxygen in a cell, right? Biology, chemistry, physics, and math. This is an example here. It came up with a whole bunch more from medicine, protein folding, genetics, chemistry. Lots of different interdisciplinary examples are possible. We went on a field trip to Banfield Science Center, which is a kelp-related. Well, I just did a bunch of research, but we were there to look at kelp. And on the boat, of course, our physicist Mark Halpern was on the ferry because it's an island and a trip away, and he was teaching us about lift. And he decided to get a sheet, put it on, and of course on top of the boat. If you've ever been on a ferry, this is extremely dangerous. You can actually float away, and you can see he is elevated off the ground, right? And so depending on how far out he stretched, he could actually fly away. So do this under supervision, but this was a great lesson on some physics concepts as well. This is another interesting example. A spherical tomato and a cylindrical portion of a cucumber have the same height and radius. They are then chopped into slices of equal thickness. Comparing each slice, which will have more lateral surface area. Okay, so this is probably not super interdisciplinary, but it's a cool question that actually was posted a couple months ago in our group chat from Science One 10 years ago. Some person was like, hey, you guys will find this question interesting. And so we then debated about this, and there was an answer which you can look up. But yeah, anyway, so this kind of thing continues even beyond the program. So I want to talk a couple minutes about the challenges for a program like Science One. I think ultimately at the top of the list is resources, right? We said that there were 8 instructors in this program, and there were 80 students. So a 1-to-10 ratio of faculty to students is extremely expensive for the institution, right? Typically classes at the first year science are 150, 250, in that range. But here we have 8 faculty members in a room with 80 people. And so there's things you can do to kind of add efficiencies in other areas. They're not always working when they're kind of attending these classes. They might be working on other things as well. So there's things you can do, but ultimately resourcing is probably the biggest challenge of a program like this from the institution side. But the benefits are enormous. And this is why this program has continued to be in existence despite other programs being cut, because it's so successful academically and pedagogically, and also culturally and socially as well for students. From the student side, there are significant challenges in trying to retain students that are struggling, right? And so if let's say you're struggling in math, you get 1 score at the end of the year. How do you support the students if in a standard curriculum or program, if they fail a course, they can just repeat that 1 course, right? But at the end of the year in Science One, they get 1 score. And so you need to make sure that your supports are there to help students who are struggling through the program. And students sometimes feel trapped in, at least the ones that are struggling, they feel trapped in, do I drop the whole program? I can't just drop this 1 course. And so there's like logistical constraints that over time, I'm sure have kind of reduced because of the supports that have been added for students. But that's definitely a challenging thing. And kind of another challenge is, even though Science One meets the prerequisites for almost all science specializations, there are some specific cases where programs find it difficult to require a course, knowing that they would have to exclude this population of students from taking this if they require that 1 course, right? And so those are challenges that exist. Other challenges is that in terms of the course content and the level, certainly it's true that Science One goes deeper into more concepts and more the more learning outcomes are taught at a faster pace compared to the standard first year curriculum. But I think that's also just the nature of the students that are there, right? And so there's potentially some difference in ability. But I think at the end of the year, things even out in terms of grades and scores. That's kind of all taken into account. And the average scores in Science 1 grades coming out are higher than in traditional first year programs. Okay, lots of opportunities for this. Personally, I would love to see computer science and data science integrated into Science 1 as well. Speaking a little selfishly as well, because now I'm teaching those particular concepts, but also because it's the perfect way to bridge some of these disciplines in a non-traditional way, right? Computing and using examples of data from all these different disciplines is a really good way of finding out another way to cohesively teach some of this stuff. So that's kind of where I sit in terms of opportunities that exist. Okay, I'll stop here. Thanks for listening, and happy to answer questions as they come up.
There have been a few questions in the chat. James has been kindly addressing them as they go.
Thanks, James.
Liz has just written something. How might we consider supporting students, with weak academic knowledge and skills in a single content area? And could we explore that as opportunity for discussing how pedagogical approaches might help? Yeah, Liz, do you want to elaborate? Or on top of that, that did, like, when you were talking about that as a challenge for us, that really stood out to me as well, because it seems almost insurmountable, but clearly it's not. If a student is failing one of their classes, but it's an interdisciplinary program like yours, where it's all tied up, what do they pass anyway and get the credit for that course?
Well, James was the director for 10 years. So James, can I toss that one to you?
Sure. I was taught for 10 years. I was the director for maybe 6 of them, but associate director. Yeah, so it's a really good question. There is okay, so if a student really does fundamentally not meet the learning goals of, say, the math portion, let's use that as an example, and we really don't think the student is prepared to take second-year math courses, then the program will actually split what we'll do is split the whole program apart for that student when they exit. So they'll get grades for all the chemistry equivalents, all the physics equivalents, all the biology equivalents, the first term of calculus, but then they'll get an F in the second term of calculus. It's a pretty rare occurrence. It's not something we really want to do because it's not in the nature of the program. And so there is sort of a holistic judgment by the teaching team. So the grades are all decided. There's a big meeting at the end of the year where we all just talk about it and decide how we should be grading people and if we should do this process, because it is a really disruptive process for the student. But one of the things that's really interesting, and to pick on math again, is we do diagnostics. The program does a lot of diagnostics at the beginning. There are some really well-known diagnostics, like the force concept inventory for physics is a great indicator of current ability, but also predictive of how well they'll do. There's a basic skills test that math administers that is essentially an algebra test. And if you get below a certain score on that, then you go into essentially there's tutorials that are beyond what would be normally done in the Science 1 to support these students that might need some help with their math to get them on track. So those are two ways, but yeah.
But it happens rarely. So maybe that's the real answer, is that it's so rare that there's a process, but we usually try to get the student up to a level where they can continue. We as in the team.
Thanks to both of you. Liz, your question is such a big question, but interesting that I'm going to save it for the end so all of our people can discuss it, because I think Gregor will have something to say on that too. Colin has just asked, so one last question for us, and James as well, since you're both Science 1 people. What kind of external supports are there for the course? So you just spoke about the algebra, like the basic math support. Are there tutors available, practice materials? Are they centralized or by department? Is that something that you do together as a whole?
Don't remember anything like that when I was taking it. And I mean, we have tutorials where students can come in, but again, we focus on the fact that it's such a small class that the instructors are usually the ones. We have office hours, and it's not like an instructor has 250 students to help, it's just these 80. So I think we try and make do with the resources that we have been given, and of course we have, centrally there's resources for students struggling with different concepts, but it's also challenging for those students to help our students because the types of problems they'll see are more challenging than they would have seen in their first year curriculum, right? So really the first point of contact are the teaching team, the TAs, and the tutorial leaders in the program.
Well, one thing just to add that maybe Braz didn't stress about the space. So the 8 instructors, one of them is usually a teaching stream tenure member, and the other's a research stream. And the teaching stream tenure members have their offices attached to that room. So that room with the pillar, like our office is right there. And so when they're working, they just go and ask James. So there's a very high level of interaction. And there's also an alumni group that's called the Science One Survivors, SOS. It was maybe what was a funny joke maybe 24 years ago, 25 years ago, but I think framing things that way now isn't great. So we're thinking of changing the name. I like the name, but it's maybe not the thing that we want to send out, the message we want to send out. So I think they're thinking of changing the name now. Yeah.
All right, there are more questions, but I think it's best that we move on to Gregor's section, and then we will come back to some of the large questions that this is bringing up in the discussion. So thank you, Firas.
There we go. Everything should be fine now. Thank you very much, Phoebe. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to speak here about the science first year experience, and especially about the integrated science seminar that is part of that experience. I'll have a few photos here and there to give you an impression about this integrated science seminar. But first of all, a little bit of background. A few years ago, starting in 2019, the science first year experience was a cohort of students that took the science profile courses together. So very similar to UBC, what I've seen: basic math, calculus 1 and 2, basic physics, biology, and general chemistry 1 and 2. And in order to bring these disciplines, but also bring the students together, there was a 2-term integrated science seminar called SFYX, Science First Year Experience, 201 and 202, to provide examples in an interdisciplinary fashion of the material covered in those fundamental courses in physics, in math, in chemistry, and in biology. Another goal was to introduce the faculty members of the different departments involved, in order for students to get a better idea what is being done in the departments, break down some barriers with respect to access, and get students interested in the research that the faculty members were doing, so that they get a broader view and kind of shake off some of the cliches that all the chemists are working in the lab, pipetting all day and doing nothing else. So that there is really a broad and a diverse research that is being done. Right now, the SFYX 201 is attached to Science College, which offers a minor in interdisciplinary studies. For select students, the SFYX is really a hybrid course. You don't have to be a member of Science College. You don't have to be registered in a minor, but you're just interested in multidisciplinary issues. And it offers credit towards a minor, but also offers credit as an elective for students exploring different scientific disciplines. In terms of the learning outcomes, it is essentially an introduction to good scientific practice, accessing information, extracting information, integrate perspectives from the different disciplines involved by way of students from different disciplines taking that course, but also faculty members contributing from different disciplines to that course. Basic training in communicating scientific results, critical thinking, problem-solving skills development, and use and appreciate peer instruction, collaborative learning. An environmental science topic was really something that is well suited for this approach because environmental science by definition is interdisciplinary, covering large aspects from modeling to the plant world, soil, water, the chemistry and chemical interactions, as well as physical processes that need to be described. So I designed this course around two projects in its current iteration. And both projects also include some type of field work. The first project essentially consisted of sampling and analysis of an abandoned and partially cleaned up, partially untouched mine site, an old copper mine site in the Eastern Townships, about 2 hours east of Montreal, followed by analysis for 10 different trace metals. And the second project consists of building an air quality monitor, a low-cost air quality monitor, to measure fine particulate matter in the immediate living environment of the students. So students would take this home and do measurements according to their project plan, where they live or where they're interested in doing those measurements. So I'll talk a little bit about those projects. Background information gathering at the start to introduce especially first-year students. And by first year, I mean either fresh out of high school or first-year Quebec students who complete their fundamental science courses in CEGEP. Background information gathering, input from faculty members with respect to specific aspects of the topic to be covered. Definition of projects objectives by the students in a collaborative atmosphere. You can see here on the photo students working on the soil aspect of the project, two groups, one charged with soil, the other charged with water, and the impact of trace metals flowing out of this mine on the immediate environment. They came up with a project plan. They vary from year to year depending on the interests, depending on the students involved. Some students were interested in analyzing plant material. We're trying, the teaching team, TA and myself, we're trying to make this work for them, find the necessary resources, involve faculty as required so that they can carry out the project. Then off to the implementation and analysis phase, and finally an introduction to data analysis, which kind of varies to the level of instruction of the student. More advanced students could look at statistical analyses. Students coming right off from high school might only look at visualization and simple tests, simple statistical tests. So the course scales very well to the individual level of knowledge of the students and therefore has very different outcomes with respect to the student population taking it from year to year. And students would then typically report on the results, do a presentation, do a poster in order to cover the basis of scientific communication. So with regard to the field trip to the copper mine in the Eastern Townships, it's a very fortunate situation on the ground. There are 3 abandoned mines. One mine has been converted to a tourist attraction. We usually get a dedicated tour that tells us about the background, historical information, but also geological information. Typically more than the average tourist would get, but it's a very nice experience to highlight what's been happening there in the past. A few kilometers along is the Eustis mine, which used to be the deepest mine in Canada, all hand dug back in the day, where the water and soil groups get to work. In the latest iteration, we actually used public transport to go to Sherbrooke, and later on got some bicycles so that we can do the last 15 kilometers by bike, carrying all our equipment. to show that we can do this without additional resources and hiring cars, which at the time was also prohibitively expensive. So the students get to work according to their sampling plan. They're carrying logbooks and notebooks, first of all, to document their own experience in the form of a journal, but also to constantly reflect on, are they following their plans? Are they deviating from the plan, and why? They're all planning from paper, from historical documents, from information that was released by the Ministry of Mines. There are a couple of scientific publications that they used in the preparation of the project, but it doesn't always work out that way on the ground. So because of the weather, some areas might be inaccessible that they were initially trying to sample at. So there's a lot of corrections which need to be applied on the ground, snap decisions to be made after some deliberation. And this is a good way to reflect on how a project is planned and how it's actually getting carried out. We work with the Center for Biological Applications of Mass Spectroscopy, CBAMS, here at Concordia to get the samples analyzed. It's a good introduction to physical analysis. We're using ICP-MS after digestion, which with HNO3, in order to look at the selected trace metals that were defined at the beginning of the project, and then there is a data analysis and visualization step. This project typically ends with an oral presentation by the two groups to each other. They do some data sharing, but the final outcomes are shared at the end of the project with those presentations. The second project, so it's split into about 6 weeks each for each project, is the assembly and deployment of a PM2.5 monitor. The idea is to look at hyperlocal and local air quality issues, something that is being increasingly reported in the scientific literature, also for supposedly relatively clean cities in terms of air quality, unless there are major forest fires going on, obviously. But there are pollution hotspots to be discovered, and it's very often related to the individual experience of the students. This project was designed out of a community science project that I was part of in the community of Ganawage on the South Shore. The Ganawage Environmental Protection Office has collaborated with Concordia on a low-cost community monitoring project, and the simplified version is here used in class, which is also a very nice motivation for students to explore their own immediate environment. There are assembly sessions. You can see a student here working on some soldering, some other students working on the assembly of the monitors, and in pairs develop their own project objectives. So it's a step further to what we've seen in the mine project. More autonomy is required from the student. And they also present that project then themselves. It can focus on indoor or outdoor air quality. Some students have looked at traffic patterns at major intersections. Some have looked at indoor air quality with respect to particulate matter when it comes to cooking and ventilation. Whatever they're interested in, and after the data analysis and visualization step, there's typically a poster presentation in a vernissage type of way, so that students can check out each other's work and ask questions and get informed about what has been done during those last few weeks. As part of the project, we also have a library workshop at the very beginning. We introduce the students to the library resources. The subject librarian, or one of the subject librarians, is coming and talking about searching and reviewing the scientific literature. There's faculty input from different perspectives, from different disciplines, especially in the project preparation phase. And I've also seen how students from different disciplines support each other, the math students contributing the stats and helping out with the stats, the biology students talking about plants and soils, whereas the chemists are generally quite knowledgeable about trace metals and toxicity issues, also together with the biology students. So there's a great deal of synergy brought to to this project, which has different aspects really of the sciences involved. And it's also an attempt, first attempt at scientific communication, those commonly used method within the sciences to help students to make their first step in that area. So there's been quite a bit of feedback which we're collecting. If you're wondering about the temperatures, students have pinned those sticky notes on a thermometer in order to indicate a little bit their temperature about this. So this is positive feedback with respect to the fieldwork. I think fieldwork in the sciences is a huge appeal to students and takes them out of essentially those trodden paths, as I said, with the pipetting chemist. Having direct access to results, owning the data, owning the device is also something that is quite appealing to students. And the discussion that follows and the in-depth analysis for each project as they're discussing, as they're collaborating, as they're working together, bringing their unique perspectives to the table. What students find sometimes difficult is some are a little bit wary of the collaboration and writing those reports. It's certainly not a course that is easy in the sense of the requirements. Also, the required degree of autonomy can be challenging for students, and depending on the general student makeup, but also the information that faculty provide, that the instructor provides, it can be quite specific and quite advanced, so that some students feel overwhelmed if some of those aspects are being discussed. Overall, the course is quite successful, and students are really quite happy to take it. It provides an opportunity for them to learn about other disciplines by working on a common task and a common project. Thank you.
Thank you. So many ideas. There's been stuff flying in the chat as you've been talking. Does anyone have any questions specifically for Gregor before we move to the more comprehensive discussion? Then it's discussion time. So to start us off, anyone can ask a question. You can raise your hand and speak up at any time. You can type in the chat and I'll bring those to our speaker's attention. But Liz had a question that I promised I was going to bring up. Where'd it go, Liz? Do you remember what it was? Why don't you just ask it?
Well, I guess I have a question sort of globally for what Firas and James's program, which is it just for really strong students? Or could we imagine, that it could be a way of learning that facilitates more and encourages more students to think about doing science or improving their science? So I guess a pragmatic part of my question is, do you have any evidence that bringing a bunch of sciences together and teaching them as this kind of relational thing, helping students learn the science, the specific science topics? Like, does bringing physics and math closer together more intentionally, as you said, James, make the math easier for students to learn?
It is a very good question. Maybe I'll answer it in two parts. The first one is, Science One as a program during my time had a bit of an identity crisis. Are we an interdisciplinary program? Are we an honors program, an honors feeder program? Are we meant to be a challenging program? And so that was something that we had to think about. And I think one of the things that we stayed with is that it's a challenging program. There are other elements to the program that, like, there's a 2-term projects that students have to do. There's a term 2 measurement project, which is actually very similar to the kind of project that Gregor mentioned and has many of the same challenges that Gregor mentioned for uptake. The second part, so the research that we did on the program using those interdisciplinary levels, those levels of interaction, the thing that we found is students only made deep connections. They only made those level 4, level 3 connections when they were explicitly designed and pretty much told by the teaching team. So those comments that I saw to help use as examples for the levels, that was taken from 26 weeks of journal entries. So a weekly journal entry of a reflective practice of the past week. And the question was, what did you learn last week, and how did it relate to the other stuff you learned last week, or the other stuff you've learned in the course since? And it was only when we were really, 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 really intentional, such as like teaching the Euler method in the computer science while having a physics assignment that used it, while doing the limit definition of the derivative, that it all like came together. And a student was like, hey, I can make these big leaps. I think, and I'm just sort of thinking about this now. Okay. There's another aspect to it, is that our primary indicator of success in Science 1 was that math basic skills test, which is why we provided tutors for students who didn't do well on it. Students could do poorly in the other skills tests and do fine in Science 1, and do fine in the discipline. You could do poorly in the FCI, the Force Concept Inventory, do great in physics. So there was a predictor of success, and it was those math abilities. And so, partially answer your question, I think the math abilities help the other subjects rather than the subjects helping the math ability. And the final thing, just so I'll stop talking, is I think there's an additional cognitive load that exists on the students in this kind of program that doesn't exist in a multidisciplinary program. In a multidisciplinary program, you're learning physics, you're learning math. These are compartmentalized, and I have a very specific things that I'm meant to learn. And in a program that's interdisciplinary, now I'm learning those, but now you're telling me that, wait a minute, they're the same thing? And there's something else that a student has to do, and I think that's necessarily a harder, more challenging thing to do.
There's a question specifically for Gregor in the chat here for Josephine. She's asked, you mentioned this course can be taken as an elective. Does there need to be a time that you dedicate to priming the students from all the different disciplines? For example, so they have a similar background on data analysis or a starting point in order to start your project?
If anything, the priming is done during the project itself, depending on the level of students. So we had some students who were really just getting introduced to data analysis. They help each other out in order to be at the same level after the project. But there is no specific requirement or a specific priming that is done other than during the preparation phase and hands-on. So during the preparation phase, a little bit an introduction to how to work with the data, and during the actual project phase, students helping each other out with working Excel. It was a student who was quite well versed in ANOVA at the time. And this is when this came in about being too challenged, as James has just mentioned, but also as it was seen on the slide, because then every other student was dedicated to making this ANOVA work for their data, and they really had trouble understanding what the outcome is in terms of the results of that. Because obviously also the understanding of the student providing this method had its limits. So, but in general, the students are helping each other out really well. And while some of the priming is done in the preparation, a lot of the work gets done just students helping each other out because they have specific skills outside their core discipline, outside their major, if you wish.
Thanks. I had a question. I haven't missed anyone else's question. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I wanted to know about teacher training, or maybe training is not the best word to use, but professional support for the teachers that decide to take on these courses, who probably aren't pedagogical experts to begin with, because you guys are coming from the university level. What do you get? I mean, I know at UBC, James, they have, for example, or they had like UBC has a very kind of unique system, but maybe you could talk about that, and Gregor, you as well, if there's any support for the teachers that decide to do this.
So one of the things I can talk about, so at UBC in general, there's because like you say, we're like even I who came in to teach, and I'm fairly good at teaching, I think. My background was not in teaching, though I spent a lot of time thinking about it during my PhD. I didn't go through teacher training, right? But I was supported when I came in, and one of the things we do is something called pair teaching at UBC. And so pair teaching, what it does is take a new faculty member, a new instructor, and a more senior instructor who has spent a lot of time teaching, and it assigns them to the same course and gives them a full credit for that course. And so the two people teach this course together, and in a formal pair teaching arrangement, there's a facilitator that will facilitate this. It's not always needed if the mentor is sort of senior enough and knows how to facilitate that. And it works on a way where we will, we'll hand it off by topic maybe, or by week. So, okay, you do this, you do that, and then we meet afterwards and we talk about like, well, what did you notice about how I facilitated this? What kind of feedback would you like about facilitating this? And there's also this kind of training that exists for graduate students as well. In Science 1 is like pair teaching, but like at the next level, because it's very intentional that one of the thoughts in each pair is a teaching stream person and has that focus. And so you're often sort of mentoring the research stream person who's come in to give to give this sort of interesting and close contact to cutting edge research to first year students. So that's, and I actually did formal pair teaching arrangements while in Science 1 as well. So that was fun. So when somebody would come in, they would even be senior teachers, but wanted to learn more about teaching. So that's the kind of training that exists, but it's nothing like going through actual teacher training.
No, but it's much more than you normally would get at a university level for teaching. Is that part of what's been supported by the Wyman Foundation? Because I noticed this is within the science program itself.
Yeah. So Warren might have the history of this more than I do, but I was part of the first pilot not as part of the research, but as a pair. They picked me as a pair, and they put me with. I was a new prof, and then as I got older and older, I became the mentor. Yeah, so it is something that science is done in science, and it is something that emerged out of the Wyman Initiative, which is now Skylight, and it's supported by Skylight in science.
Okay, I'm going to ask Gregor if you can address that too, and then we have another question from the audience.
I can echo some of that. While the last iteration was only taught by myself, previous iterations were also taught by pairs of teachers, typically coming from two different disciplines, so chem and biology, chem and physics, biology and physics were previous combinations. There were also some other projects, such as a tree coring project that I've not spoken about, looking at carbon storage in trees during the winter months and stuff like that, also part of a field trip. And the same way, both teachers would be present all the time throughout the term, to maybe add an aspect here or there coming from their own perspective, but also in the effort to make sure that there is training available and ease faculty into the role of teaching that seminar.
Thank you. We have a question from Margot. There's actually two questions. Margot, do you want to just ask your question out loud about the literacy?
Sure. Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask about, this is for everybody, all the panelists. I was wondering if you speak to the students about interdisciplinarity and sort of raise their literacy and understanding of it a little bit, or do you just sort of assume that they're going to, by bringing the disciplines together, the idea is that it be more holistic and they don't think so much about breaking, it's sort of in light of breaking down the silos.
So this is actually an interesting plug that we can make for the research that we were hoping to restart. We had a whole survey out where we would ask students how much linkage and interdisciplinarity there was between different pairs of disciplines. This was pre-pandemic. And so obviously, of course, we talk about interdisciplinarity a lot. And we bring speakers in who talk about different problems they're trying to solve in different disciplines. But that only does so much. That only shows them career options and research, and it doesn't quite solve the problem of, like physicists will say until the end of time that everything, if you go deep enough, is physics, right? And that's just true. I mean, I think of it as true. And then a couple of weeks ago, last week, the Nobel Prize in physics was given to someone who did machine learning and AI research, and everyone was up in arms about how that's not physics, and we can't have it both ways. And so things like that, we really could do a better job of motivating in actually the program and how we talk about things. And like chemists will say the same thing. Like if you go deep enough, everything's at the atom level and it's all just chemistry. And math will say without math, there's nothing of any of these. And so I think that there's a natural kind of like interesting rivalry type thing that we can leverage to get students interested in talking about this, to build that awareness. But really what we should do instead is to convince them that all of life's interesting problems require multiple disciplines. And I think that that's something that we need to do a better job of explaining. Oh, there's an XKCD in the chat. Of course there is.
There is XKCD for everything.
There's an XKCD for everything. Yeah, exactly that.
And James has also, Margot, James also contributed at the end there with Science One as a specific scientific thinking and literacy course built into it that tries to address some of that. I think that question really goes to James, what you were saying, like students only make those connections if we make them explicit. So the biggest one perhaps we should be making explicit is what Margot's asking about, which what does it mean to be interdisciplinary and why are we doing it? And what should they look out for as we move ahead?
If I might add to this, in terms of anecdotal evidence for the students that have gone through the seminar, quite a few don't particularly care about the disciplines here. They're approaching a problem and they're happy to take information from wherever they can get it. I think a lot of the disciplinarity that we're seeing is actually imprinted on the students as they discover the sciences and are forced to go to the specialists and go to the mathematician, go to the physicist, go to the chemist. But their initial perception of science, and I think it's even more extreme with younger kids, it's just something to explore and I'll take whatever tools I get in order to solve that problem. And that can especially, I think, be nicely dissolved in environmental science problems or issues and projects.
Thanks, everyone. Margot asked a second question, and it's related, I think, Gregor, to what you were just getting into there. So, Gregor, this question was for you specifically. Margot said, great use of authentic assessments. Are students encouraged to work to their skills and have roles based on their academic backgrounds? and I think to add to Margot's question, and for everyone, I think that is like a fear we have with interdisciplinarity, that depth gets lost for breadth, things become superficial, because some of the problems that we try to solve that are really genuinely interdisciplinary are beyond our students as well. And or is it better, like Margot said, Margot's question is more about breaking up. Do they break it up? I'm good at this, you're good at this, let's do it, and just put the edges together? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of their academic careers, they have individual strengths that don't necessarily only align with disciplinary knowledge. They will take the role in terms of what they have heard in courses, what they have enjoyed. And since they're taking these fundamental courses in math, in physics, in chemistry, and biology, they will define their roles, as I have observed it with the relatively small cohorts, at the beginning of their academic career, more following their interests than strictly following their major or the program that they're in. There is some sort of alignment, obviously, because they have hopefully chosen their major for a reason, and are interested maybe more in those aspects that are more chemical, that are more biology. But there is really a general interest, I find, from the students taking this seminar, rather than them being fixated to the role that is given to them by virtue of the program that they're in. If that addresses the question, I'm not 100% sure.
Margot, was that? I mean, I think so. But Margot, do you want to add anything?
No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah, I was just a little bit curious about how involved you got in the teamwork, and if you set up how they were going to work on it, or if you let them work to, make decisions on their own. But you absolutely responded. Yeah, thank you.
So Liz asked a question in the chat, but this was a question for everyone in the audience, not just our speakers, which is, we've had all these really good examples today of projects that can be done, questions, different scales of interdisciplinarity. Can you, the audience, can we see examples at the college level, or if you're at the university level in your own areas? Can you see any examples that would work at this level? And share them with us. We can get some ideas going if we share them. Selma, I swear I saw your lips move and say yes.
Well, I think what I'm thinking about the learning communities that we had at Dawson, and how we have some similar-ish models, but I also, I don't have a proper answer other than thinking, yes, it would be great. It would be fantastic. We have different challenges and obstacles at the college level, but I think it's the possibilities are out there, and that we have smaller examples of these kinds of projects with the learning communities. I don't know if Anya wants to say anything about that, since she's much more well-versed in this than I am. I like, just to piggyback on what you just said before about the what I heard was like the identity of the students, and how you're basically breaking the barriers of their identities to make them into these interdisciplinary beings, basically. And I think it's something that may be more unique, or more prominent in the sciences. I come from social sciences, so there's the students come in with more diffuse or less well-defined identity. So in sciences, you'll have a student coming in and saying, like, I'm in chemistry, or I prefer biology versus physics, or something along the lines. And I don't know if that's completely true, but anecdotally, what I'm seeing in the social sciences is less of that kind of hard divide between the disciplines. We already have lots of courses in the CEGEP level that are fostering interdisciplinary thinking in our field. So I don't know if that helps in any way, but it's just a comment. Okay.
If I may add, since you called on me, I think even through the learning communities, which is an initiative at Dawson that has been going on for a few years, and it's been pushed to a level, I think, quite far for a CEGEP level. I think we're still at the level of the multidisciplinary. When we saw the definitions at the beginning, we're trying to really make a puzzle that will look like something, but I don't think we are as advanced as interdisciplinary. The main issue is probably a time issue, because as was mentioned, sitting in someone else's classroom is something that do foster a lot of interdisciplinarity, and doing that is not really sustainable on the long term. It takes too much time.
I think Liz asked also if there was an example of this in CEGEPs, and I, in my response to her, mentioned the learning community, the race, ethnicity, and migration one, where the biggest challenge was exactly as you just said, Annie-Hélène, finding the time for the three instructors involved in that community to take their common students to through a field trip. So a lot like visiting the mine, for example. For us, we visited various museums and historical locations around the city. So that was the rate limiting step or factor in that kind of interaction. It's just finding the common time to make it happen.
James?
Yeah, thanks. So related to this, the cost, and Firas alluded to this, like the cost of a program like Science One is quite high. But my response to that, it's high for teaching a first-year student. We give a lot at our university, at UBC at least. We have many courses that have the same instructor to student ratio in fourth year, and those people spend a lot of time teaching those students. So I think the asymmetry that I've always wanted to sort of challenge and address is that we spend a lot more time teaching our upper year students than our first year students. And Science One is a place where that ratio is just what it is for the students who have decided to choose in our major, and we're a chemist and we're teaching chemists. But it is a reality though that we find savings by teaching large first year courses. So I'm right there with you. Because Science One is honestly always under threat due to that exact statement. And so it's one of the reasons we have to be like, look at the amazing people we produce. That's the value of the program.
Go ahead, Liz.
I guess I'm I keep going back to the value that you just mentioned, James. If we had more research to show there is value to the individual students, would that be something that could help to change this? I mean, I know that money is, Quebec is, definitely going through one of those right now. Like, our academic institutions are under financial pressure. So I guess I'm living in a world where, or I'm trying to live in a world where, okay, we're not under that, but can we find any data? Can we find enough data to at least support the fact that this way of teaching, which is intuitively it feels natural. When Gregor talks about his project, it's sort of like, of course, I would want to learn chemistry if I was trying to solve the problem. I think that's what you said, Gregor. People don't go in to learn. They don't feel like I'm learning chemistry. You're trying to understand the problem. And I think, what you've shown, James and Firas, similar, the students are engaged in learning, whatever it is. And even if we took it out of science and put it into social sciences, I think, again, they're engaged in learning something authentic. So how do we get enough evidence, I guess, to support that claim that we should be funding this and the inversion that you're describing? Like, let's put resources where people actually need you and need your help, which is CEGEP, first year university, as opposed to places where students are quite independent thinkers or becoming independent thinkers.
I want to keep talking, but it's 3:59. Sue's going to post this survey in the chat. Colleen, I did see your hand was up, and where are you? Oh, there you are, very top of my screen. And I'm sure you have something to add because you yourself are working on things right in this thing. So why don't we finish with you, and I will thank our speakers before you speak in case anyone has anywhere to go. It was fascinating, great examples, and we have a lot to think about here. Go ahead, Colleen.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know if it's a good time for me to open my mouth because there's a lot to say about all this. But yeah, funding, always a problem. I guess my thought is going in a million different directions in terms of we talked about in the chat, there was like this issue around team teaching and things exist. I mean, are there ways to sort of like have educators work with each other in such a way that doesn't involve funding? I mean, there should be that way. There should be that way that we can sort of share with each other moments in a classroom that illustrate, if we're from two different disciplines, and we just kind of take that moment to kind of demonstrate how whatever topic is being addressed, it applies to the other teacher's discipline. I mean, I think given the constraints of anything and everything, I think that we have to chisel away at these moments and find these spots to work together and to have more projects that kind of build bridges and demonstrate the interdisciplinarity of everything under the sun. Anyway, that's one wing of thought, because it's certainly a big topic that needs to be addressed, and desperately. And the other thing, just to quickly address, that came up also earlier in the chat, is this issue of how something like Science One is so wonderful. An interesting point about, sort of like the level of student that gets into such a thing. But this methodology really is something that, look, let's face it, it has to start earlier. And when we're taking students who have been trained in silos, and then suddenly at the, come bachelor period, they are now being said, oh, look at this. There's a way that you can now come together and we can demonstrate, and you can be part of an environment that is about, sort of transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary thinking. It's a bit of a stretch, and it's not that it's not a phenomenal experience that I'm sure so many students gravitate to and love. But I think these are the conversations, is to really go to that question mark around the earlier phases of our education, and ask ourselves how we deconstruct and reconstruct our earlier learning environments. Anyway, 402. Such a conversation. Thank you so much for this. This is such an interesting experience.
Thank you, Colleen. You had the last word. Thank you.
Oh.
Already, yeah. Gregor had to go and Firas have to go. James, thank you very much. I really appreciated the theoretical underpinnings. It was very helpful.
Oh, thank you. It was nice to come and talk about it and think about it again. Like Firas was saying, it's stuff that we haven't thought about since before the pandemic. I can be honest. The pandemic really derailed a lot of things. So it's nice to re-engage in it. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone who's still here for coming and everyone who already left.